Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's August 23rd, 2018, and we have a very compelling and interesting and exciting interview for you today. Some of you may or may not know that probably the most popular, most downloaded interview of modern Mormon Stories history is that of Christine Jepson Clark. Most of you will know that because most of you have downloaded it, but it's this epic story of this woman who, was the daughter of a general authority. Her dad was Malcolm Jepson, who was Boyd K. Packer's doctor and best friend. He was involved in the September 6th stuff. But what was most epic about her story, Christine's, was growing up in the 60s in sort of an Orthodox Mormon home and all that she went through. And then what it was like, she served in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and played the organ for the tabernacle, all sorts of stuff. But eventually it kind of talked about, what's it like to go through your faith crisis in your 60s as a grandma and have kids and even grandkids deeply embedded in the church when you go through that faith crisis. And that's been one of the most, probably the most downloaded important episode of modern Mormon Stories history. And I decided that I wanted to follow up on that and to give more stories like that, but also different. And so today we have one of those stories. Today we're going to be interviewing Collette Larsen. Colette's story is really epic. It's definitely going to have that sort of pioneer ancestry, raised in the church kind of feel, growing up in the 60s as a woman. And the themes we're going to cover are really important because Collette has experienced a death of a child in her life. She's experienced divorce in her life. She experienced kind of financial ruin as a result of that first divorce, which led her to sort of the lines of poverty, where she literally was faced with either going on welfare or trying to rebuild her life as a career woman. And so as an active, believing, devout Mormon woman with several kids, a couple kids with serious illness, she became an entrepreneur and started her own business and eventually became, built up a multi-million-dollar business. It's an inspiring story. And then in her early 60s, experienced a faith crisis after having served in Relief Society presidencies, young women presidents, etc. So it is an epic story, and we think it's going to be helpful. There are so many Mormon women out there who go through a faith crisis, young or middle-aged or old, who have to rebuild. Or they go through a faith crisis and they realize they would have made very different decisions if they hadn't have been Orthodox Mormon. And so one major theme of this is going to be rebuilding your life as a woman or as a human after tragedy in the context of a Mormon context, but then also a transitioning or questioning Mormon context. This is going to be an epic story. Grandma Coco, as she's known to her grandkids, she's a mom, a wife, a grandma, an entrepreneur. Again, she's built up a multi-million-dollar global enterprise. She's lived internationally. And she's just one of those humans that is wise and insightful and powerful, but also loving. And so, Collette Larsen, I'm so delighted to have you on Mormon Stories Podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. I have a question for you.
Yes.
You said young, middle-aged, and old. Which basket would you put me in?
Between young and right around young, late young.
I'm happy to be a grandma. No, seriously, I love this stage of life. Because I've had children with serious disease that were born with basically terminal illness, cystic fibrosis. Age has always been something we've celebrated. So I just had my 66th birthday, and I am so happy to I'm proud to be 66 years old. So probably in that older basket, at least in the last third of my life. But
okay.
I'm so happy.
Early middle age then.
Okay.
Well, it's great to have you on.
Thank you.
And let's just dive right in.
Okay.
So you have pioneer heritage. Talk about that for a bit.
I do. On both sides of my family, there's a picture we have, I think his name's Clark Kelly Price, that painted that beautiful picture of there's a very shallow grave. And there's the three crosses there, and there's a mom holding a baby to the side. It's on this swept plains, and this pine, that was actually my great grandfather laying in that grave. He gave up his portion of flower so his wife and child could live, and the little baby in that painting is my grandmother. So yes, pioneer heritage there. Larsen from Denmark, from Solberg from England, coming over and settling basically in the Idaho area. But as far back as I know, I don't think we have any ties to Brigham Young or anything like that. But certainly back in those early days, a lot of polygamy in our history, in our ancestry.
So what was it like growing up in Rexburg? I kind of think of Rexburg as like the Mormon Saudi Arabia. But tell me if that was your experience.
I loved Rexburg. It was the center of my universe. And I thought Rexburg was I just thought it was the hub of everything. Occasionally we'd go all the way to Salt Lake City, but I really loved growing up there. And, everyone knew everyone. My parents were in the clothing business. We owned several clothing stores there until the flood came. And what was that, 76, when the dam broke, and it took a couple of stores we never reopened. But my grandfather was the mayor growing up. And
what was his name?
Gib Larsen. And I just felt like I knew everyone knew us. Everyone, of course, almost everyone was Mormon. It had to have been like 98% or something, But we had spud harvest every fall. We'd get out of school for, all the kids were expected, like second grade on. You were out of school, you had to go up on the dry farms, get those spuds in. I felt like it was a real community feel. The church was my life. My dad was in the bishopric numerous times. My mom was the stake primary president, and just so active. I didn't know anything else. I felt like so fortunate to have been, born in the latter days, born in the covenant, to these faithful parents. I'm the oldest of 10 children. My mom had 10 children in 14 years. Is that just, that's how it was. But, we had the ward bazaars and the road shows. And in high school, I was in that international dance festival. We got to come to Salt Lake and be in the dance festival. And we had the round-the-block parades and all of that. It was actually kind of magical. My dad was the president of I think he was the JC's president. We'd have down there in Porter Park, would have the cookouts anyway, it was great. What's
JC's?
JC's is kind of like the Lions Club. It's just a community service. No, I don't think it was the JC's. I think it was Kiwanis. I think he was Kiwanis Club president. And my parents were my dad and my grandpa, they were Democrats, which was pretty unusual in Idaho, In fact, my father was one of the delegates in 1968 to go back to Chicago, an Idaho state delegate, Democratic delegate. And then my mother, her father had been a state Republican in the legislature. And so we had this kind of fireworks all the time, this Republican-Democrat, conflict in our house. And I kind of tended to side with my dad, a little more liberal. But great growing up, wonderful friends, great relationship with my siblings. We still are very close. We have family reunions every year, and so I don't have any. And I loved the church. That was just part of my life. Release time seminary and all of that. It was great.
So what decade time span would have been, let's just say 8 to 18 years old? Would that have been in the early 60s?
I was born in 52, so okay. I graduated from high school in 1970.
Oh, so you're like a teenager right in the middle of the 60s.
Oh, yeah. And I did have some real cognitive dissonance about a few things. So first of all, I did, I've been watching, I got to meet Sam Young last weekend. I happened to be here in Salt Lake, and so I went to meet him because he's a real hero of mine. Because even though I had a very happy childhood, I had some very uncomfortable interviews. And that just didn't feel good to me, but I just figured it was part of the deal. But I also with my dad, who was quite, he's passed away, but he was pretty nuanced. He was in the bishopric and everything, but very liberal-minded. And a friend and I started the Young Democrats Club. So I remember writing an article about the war in Vietnam, how I wish I could go to a sit-in in San Francisco. I mean, I had that kind of, I didn't, every night, John, when I was growing up, you'd hear Walter Cronkite come on the TV, and they'd say how many had died that day in Vietnam. And, I knew boys that had gone over, and I just couldn't figure it out. I didn't feel right about it. So I had that kind of little bit of a liberal activist going on one side of my brain, and then on the other side, that was when Fascinating Womanhood came out, and some of these books about how to, I remember reading that book and being told in that book that I should wear pigtails and stamp my foot and pout if I wanted to get my way. And, so I was like this activist girl, budding feminism, and then trying to fit this mold, knowing that, my role in life was to help bring spirits into this world and all those things. So some early conflict, even though I feel like my childhood was very happy.
So your dad was a potato farmer?
No, my dad owned clothing stores.
Okay,
but if
you said helping out with the potatoes.
Yes, everybody did.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that. In Rexburg, back in the 60s, the school closed. Everything, elementary, junior high, high school, we closed for at least 2 weeks in October. And all of the kids helped the farmers get, we picked spuds. We put them in baskets, put them in gunny sacks. A lot of my friends were driving trucks at 13, 14 years old. If the potato farmers didn't do well in Idaho, in Rexburg, then no one did well, because that's who bought the clothes, that's who went to. So it was just a community, a real community thing. Something interesting that probably not too many people know is that when I was in high school, there was a move to move Ricks College. There was a kind of this groundswell to move Ricks College. I think it was to Idaho Falls. And my grandpa was the mayor, and he really put up a stink about that. I think it was with Wilkinson. I wish I'd done a little research on that, but I remember being really proud of my grandpa, like holding Ricks College, in Idaho. And of course, always in the fall when the college kids would come, especially when I was in high school, it was like, here come the college boys, it was kind of fun.
Were you paid to pick those potatoes or not?
Oh yeah, I think you got 25 cents a bag or something. So if you worked, it was slave wages, truthfully. But back in 1966 or whatever, you could make $150 or $200 in those 2 or 3 weeks. And, that was a lot of money back then.
So as far as the things you loved about the church, you talked about roadshows and dance festivals. What was your spiritual life like as a teenager in Rexburg?
Our family was very devout. Family home evenings. I'm the oldest of 10, so, I was a cheerleader and in drill team, and I would get up very early in the morning for my practices. My father was always sitting in his rocking chair, often by the fireplace with his scriptures open. He loved the scriptures, and he loved Shakespeare. He was either reading Shakespeare or reading the scriptures. And my mother was she was this organized, incredible mom. She just ran our home, And we always had family home evening. We always had breakfast together. We always had family prayer before we could leave for school. We never missed. We kept the Sabbath day holy. We weren't one of those families that had to stay in our Sunday clothes or anything, but we didn't shop or anything like that. The Sabbath was a different day. So, it was there was a lot of ritual around that, and I think I enjoyed that. On the other hand, I was a little bit of a black sheep. I was the black, I was I think I was the MyMaid class president, was at MyMaid's back. I was very, very involved. I loved mutual, but I had this boyfriend that I'd had since 7th grade, and we basically were together almost all through high school. And we were really, really good kids. He was a wonderful young man. But we were together too much, and we started messing up, and oh my gosh, we would be heartbroken that we felt like we'd gone too far. And so, we'd go to the bishop. He was in a different ward, but I'd go to the bishop, and then, the bishop would tell me, okay, you can't, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I just kept trying to be better, and then I'd slip up, and then I just started feeling so like, what is wrong with me? I keep repenting, and then I mess up, and then I repent, and then I mess up, and that sort of, and not even understanding that, of course I understand now, hormones are raging and all of that, and I actually don't have too many regrets about that now, but at the time, I started feeling less and less worthy. And finally, my mother read my journal, my diary, and knew that I was struggling. And so my parents thought I should go see someone in the stake presidency and get my life in order. And I will never forget, this is where the shame really started, I think, because I sat across from this gentleman who was a dear friend of my parents, who I had a lot of respect for. And I confessed to him, that I was trying, and he looked at me and he said, do you think the problem might be that you're just oversexed? And I was like 15, and I was like, oh, I just felt broken. Like, isn't that a terrible thing to say?
How do you answer that?
I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. I just really feel like I love him, and we're trying. And anyway, so I had that conflict going on, like wanting to be a good girl, feeling like I wasn't. I remember, a lesson in seminary where they took the board. He had a board, and it nailed all these nails in it. And he was talking about chastity. And he said, you did this, you petted, and he was nailing these. And then he pulls the nails out and he turns around and he says, but the holes are still there. And I just felt like, man, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. I still remember just feeling like, I want to be with my family, and I've messed up so much. God must be so angry with me because I'm such a hypocrite. I'm always begging for forgiveness, and then I mess up, So that kind of high school angst was really, really tough.
So on the one hand, I can see a thoughtful leader wanting to help you avoid teenage pregnancy, wanting to help you avoid STDs or STIs, wanting you to kind of not wreck your life on the one hand. So I guess in theory, I could see a leader who cares about you wanting to just help you not wreck your hopes and dreams.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, there's all the Sam Young stuff. So where was it in the continuum for you? It sounds like you felt a lot of shame. Were there inappropriate questions, or did they cross lines? And if so, what can you say about that, or do you want to say about that?
Yeah, like that question was, I felt like it was inappropriate. Do you think you just might be oversexed? I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe
that represents the inappropriate.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember too many of the other. I remember not being able to take the sacrament, and I remember one time it was the seminary program. And I was sitting up there and in the stands, and thinking everyone was watching me, and I had been told not to take the sacrament, and I just felt like the shame. I know that I just turned crimson, just the shame of feeling that. Now I absolutely understand what you're saying, and I'm a mom and a grandma, but I think the problem is what I wish we could do. I wish we could just talk about these things. I wish we could talk about sexual activity and what this means and what this means and what this means. And maybe we're, like, if I could go back and be a mother again, because I didn't even do this with my own daughters. It's kind of a, it's kind of a taboo subject to we just don't talk about it very much. And if you are going to cross that line, you should be protected. I would never have thought of protection from pregnancy, because then that's like admitting beforehand that you're going to sin. It's really messed up, isn't it? I mean, teenagers, it's so tough. But I did feel like that boyfriend I had all through high school. We've stayed in a little bit of contact over the years. He's a great guy. I think he's an active member of the church, and he went on to go on a mission and everything. And so anyway, that part worked out.
So a lot of times we associate the 60s and 70s and maybe 80s with kind of Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie, Mormonism, and all that stuff in Mormon doctrine. Would that have been?
Absolutely. My parents had, in fact, I would love to find their original copy of Mormon doctrine, because I can remember there were two big books back. Mormon Doctrine was one of them, and then who wrote that book? Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask. Well, those, I remember my girlfriend had that, and we snuck that out of her mom's library, and we would read that. But I would take Mormon Doctrine, and I would read through it. And I still remember, because a family had moved into our community that were Catholic. And so I wanted to learn, and I remember reading in Mormon Doctrine, and I think it said in that book, I'm almost positive, that the Catholic Church was the whore of all the earth, or something. I was going, oh, so immediately I thought of that family as just like evil, and that book was horrific. But yes, we had Mormon Doctrine, and it was the Bible in our home, And of course, Ezra Taft Benson, that was a little bit later, but his, I remember having some difficulty with the stuff he said about women, and, he was you stay at home and you just have those babies. And, when I first got married, I got married at, I barely turned 18. 17 in July, married at 18, ridiculous. But, I felt like we shouldn't use birth control, things like that.
What would your maybe desires or inklings for yourself have been, and then what was the role that the church had for you? Can you talk, was there a conflict there?
Yes, there was.
Talk about both.
There was. I loved learning, and I was a very good student. And, now I wish, I've got a high school education, John, that's it. And I just think, oh my goodness, I just wish. And so after I broke up with my one boyfriend, I really did feel like damaged goods by that point. So then I started dating this boy that had come to Rick's College. His parents had sent him there to straighten him up. And I messed up again, and I didn't feel worthy to go through the temple. He asked me to marry him. And it was kind of this feeling like, if you've already messed up, I'm going to call it that, you can think whatever you want, but then I don't deserve anyone else. It was kind of that thing. I might as well just marry him.
It's kind of like what Elizabeth Smart talks about.
Yeah,
she was damaged goods. Who else would want her?
So
chewed gum.
If I went to in fact, I think I actually got a partial scholarship to BYU, and I turned it down because this guy had asked me to marry him. And I just thought, the other thing is I was the oldest of 10 children, a lot of responsibility. I'd been working in my dad's clothing store since I was young, and I just saw marriage as I'm going to escape, I'm going to get out and have my own life. And so married very, very young. And then I just felt like we didn't get married in the temple. And so then it was
that shaming?
Yeah, it was.
Were your parents disappointed?
Oh, so disappointed. My parents weren't happy with my marriage at all. They really didn't want me to marry this man, this young man. He was only 20. And my dad walked me down the aisle and with tears coming down his face. And the bishop that married me was he'd been my bishop, and he was so mad. He didn't even say anything to us. It was a terrible wedding. It was terrible. He just went, do you take, there was no counseling, no, it was just boom, 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 and we were married.
And why was your dad crying?
Because he was heartsick. He
was it that you weren't in the temple, or that he didn't like the guy, or he thought you were marrying too young?
Yes, and yes.
All of those things?
All of those things.
So he wanted more for you than an early marriage?
Yes. In
Why?
fact,
okay.
He wanted to send me to New York to fashion design school and things. And why I didn't do that, I know now, it's because I just didn't feel worthy of any of that. I knew, I just felt like I've made my bed, I better just lie in it.
Because what messages had the church sent you?
Yeah, several things. The damaged good, that you're not worthy. And when I've talked about this to like my sisters and things, they'll go, well, that's what repentance is for. But there's still those messages go really, really deep. And I didn't feel worthy of anything else. And I thought, well, at least if I'm married, then I'm legal, I'm not messing up anymore. And I don't know. What's in a 17-year-old girl's mind? I'll tell you what I do feel now. At 66, I look back at her and I feel a lot of compassion, because I know I was just struggling. I wanted to be good. I wanted my parents to be proud of me. So my next step, I thought, is if I can get my husband to the temple, if we can go through the temple in a year, and we went in we went through and were sealed like a year and 3 days after we were married. So that was and then maybe then I can get on this path of righteousness, start having children. I'll have 10 too, and I'm going to make up for my mistakes. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, how'd that go?
How did that work out for you? Well, first of all, the temple was, oh my goodness, this was 1971, pardon me, but.
Back when it was more fun.
Oh, I remember that going there and it had been my goal, my ultimate, this is it, and then I just remember I kept looking around thinking, are my mom and dad okay with this? And then all the oaths and it just was so brutal to me. It just seemed so, and it wasn't at all. I didn't have any of the feelings that I felt like in fast and testimony meeting, for instance. I was so confused on the clothing, and that was back in the day of the full-length garments and everything. I was so uncomfortable and just, oh man. But at least I had, you look around and all these people that you love and respect, they're totally into it, and I'm just going, okay, this has got to be it. And my dad, my mom and dad went to the temple every week, and my dad said something to me that I still haven't figured out. He said he learned something new every time he went, and he assured me that if I just kept going, that it was all about symbolism, and that I'd get this meaning, and I'd feel the depth of the spirit there. And I ended up being a temple worker up until a few years ago. I actually got so that I enjoyed different aspects of it. I enjoyed the ritual of it. I enjoyed sitting in the celestial room, and I enjoyed the quiet. I would work in the San Diego temple and just the calm and things there. So, but boy, the first few times I went through was really tough.
And for those who don't know the history or have gone through kind of since 1990, they won't know that the temple ceremony had a lot of Masonic rituals that involved oaths, penalties, hand signs that were very graphic and gory. When I said it was more fun back then, I was being sarcastic. Yeah. It was, for many of us, very traumatic. Yeah. To go through hand motions of harming yourself in very violent ways. Yeah. Slitting your throat or disemboweling yourself, and it's very disturbing. And it's good they got rid of it.
Yes.
You wonder how it ever got in there.
Oh, and then even before that, the washing and anointing. Back then you literally just had like a poncho on you, and whoever was helping me said, take off all your clothes. I'm like, what? That was just, again, I'm 18, 18 years old, and no, I just turned 19, but it was like, and then this sweet little old ladies that like reaching in and touching my body, and it just felt, it was violating to me. I was so happy when they changed all those things.
But just recently.
Recently they changed that. Yeah. And it was like way overdue in my estimation.
Yeah. Okay, so got in the temple and started being the fabulous mother.
Yeah.
And wife, right?
Yes, I had my first son when I was 20, and actually had 5 children in 7 years, and not a very happy marriage, but I loved being a mother. There was a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of infidelity in that marriage. But again, I think because my parents and the people who loved me were so opposed to the marriage, I was going to make it work, come hell or high water. I was going to prove them all wrong. I have this streak in me, this rebellious streak, like if they say it won't work, I'm going to make it work. So numerous, without going into, but just so much heartache and sadness. And, my husband was excommunicated twice, on probation a few times, different things like that, just lots of infidelity. But again, in what I would internalize is, what did I expect? I was not, I broke all the rules. I'd had this patriarchal blessing that my patriarchal blessing actually said, I read it not too long ago, I was given all these incredible blessings, but then it said, if you were ever tempted to be married outside the temple and then sealed later, you will lose the blessings that are pronounced on your head this day. So I'd actually been given like this warning. I think the patriarch knew my dad or whatever. I don't know how that ended up in there. But, I thought, I've already lost all the blessings. No wonder my marriage is so difficult.
So you experienced that patriarchal blessing as a condemnation on the marriage you ended up entering into.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my gosh, that's not a great way to start a marriage.
I know, and that, but I knew, again, I don't know. I can't unravel her mind and what she was thinking, but I knew, I felt like used goods, broken goods, I better try to make the best of it. So I just thought, I'll just have as many children as I can, earn those celestial points or whatever. And I did love being a mom. I just loved being a mom. I had a great role model in my mother. And so I had, at 20, I had my first son, and 16 months later, I had my second son, and 12 months later, I had my first daughter. So I had 3 children, and the oldest had just turned 2. So really, it was like having triplets. And then I waited a few years and had another little girl who we realized early on was just really, really sick all the time. She just failed to thrive. And lots of, we couldn't figure it out. Took her to lots of doctors, lots of specialists, everything else. And she just couldn't eat. She couldn't keep her food down. She was always coughing. So I was always trying to suppress her cough and everything. And in the meantime, I got pregnant again. We wanted to have 2 more. I wanted to have 2 more pretty close. And so I was pregnant and finally took her to a doctor. And, she was like 12 months old and only weighed like 12 pounds or something. She was tiny. And the doctor put her foot in his mouth. And I thought, okay, I finally found a real quack here. And he sucked on her foot and he took her foot out and he said, "Have you ever heard of cystic fibrosis?" I went, "No." And he wrote it down, and he said, "I want to run some tests on her." And with cystic fibrosis, your skin is very salty, so that's why he was tasting her little foot. I didn't know that. But anyway, I do remember going home, and I was 7 months pregnant at the time. I went home and looked up in my health journal or whatever, cystic fibrosis, and I still remember just literally slumping to the ground because it said that it was a terminal disease. And he also asked me if there'd been any, if I knew anything about my relatives. Had any of them died young? And I didn't. I said, well, back in our genealogy, there's this thing called consumption, and there are people, I don't know what that was. And he goes, oh, that's interesting, So anyway, she did this sweat chloride test, and it came back positive. My beautiful daughter had cystic fibrosis. And then, of course, I'm pregnant again. And what you learn is that it's a genetic disease. Both the father and the mother are carriers. And then each of your children have a 25% chance of having this disease. Our 3 older children, no problem. But obviously, he'd carried that gene from one of his parents. I had it from one of mine. And then I spent the next 2 months, I had blessings, praying, just that this new baby would be, not have this. And then she was born with it also. And we knew that because as soon as she was born, she had this blockage. And so while I was still on the table, I had my tubes tied. I knew that if this baby had CF, I had all that I could handle. So I remember laying on the table just crying, thinking, I'm only going to have 5 children. I mean, 5 is a lot of kids. But I had to make up for a lot of mistakes in my life. But I did have these 2 beautiful little girls who were so sick. And then these 3, so, my oldest had just turned 7, and I had 5 children, and my husband was having another, side thing going on, and man.
This idea of having babies.
Was tough.
This idea of having babies to, earn your worth and make up
But, that was the message, that there's all these spirits, and they could go to Africa if you don't have them, or they could go to,
even worse.
I know, it's just terrible.
You're making it worse.
I know. I understand that. I hear the words I'm saying, but that is what we were, they could come, they could be born in the covenant. They could come, they could live in America, just all these, and they're not going to be born into abject poverty or something, And so there was a real, I mean, my parents, I was the oldest of 10. Our family joke, my dad wanted 2, and my mom wanted a dozen, and my dad said, we'll keep having them until we get an ugly one. So we always teased my youngest brother that he was the final one. And by the way, he's very handsome. But, that was, back then, big families were the thing,
You talked about a meeting with Marion D. Hanks.
Well, yes, my husband had been excommunicated once, and then, finally he was, so after his first excommunication, it had been several years, and in order to get back, I don't know if it's the same now, but in order to have your blessings restored, you had to meet with an apostle. So we, at the time, were living up in Spokane, Washington, and Marion D. Hanks was near Seattle, I think it was. And so we drove over there and had a...
Was he an apostle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he was an apostle. Okay. I think he was one of the 12 at the time. I think. I'll have to go back. This would have been...
A GA or apostle?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not even sure what year this would have been. Probably early 80s maybe. But anyway, we did go meet with him. And I remember just being so, like this is such a privilege. But I don't remember too much of what he said, except this relief that flooded over me. Because I wanted my marriage to survive. And I wanted things to change. I loved my husband. Every time he messed up, he came back and begged to come back. He didn't want to leave. He just was so sorry. And we went through counseling, and that's all. Ugh. Anyway, oh my gosh. But Marion D. Hanks said to him, I want you to understand, you can, I'm going to let you're going to be reinstated. Your blessings are going to be reinstated. But if this ever happens again, you will be excommunicated and you will never be rebaptized. And I was like, wow. And I think that was actually something back then, that you could only be excommunicated once. You couldn't come back again. So I just remember this relief, and he said, of course, it's never going to happen again, of course. And of course it did happen again. But this relief flooded over me like, we're going to make it. We are going to make it. An apostle has given us this warning and given us this promise, and we're going to make it. So, yeah.
What does it do to a woman with multiple kids to be cheated on by your husband? What is that? How is that? What is that like? I know obviously it's awful, but talk about what it does to a woman to be home with the kids, cheated on by the husband. What does that do?
It's just, I don't know. It's really hard to put it into words because you just, I'm very optimistic. I've been called Pollyanna all my life. So every time I thought, we're going to make it. I'm going to love you more than anyone could ever. You're trying to win this love over, I think, and be as good as whoever he's been with or whatever. And it's just, but there's this conflict and there's also anger that you're always trying to suppress because, if you really blow up, he's going to go off again, So there's just, and he obviously was not happy. He obviously didn't love me. And now, in retrospect, I can look back on that and say, we should have split the sheets right in the beginning and just gone because obviously I didn't have what he needed. I couldn't provide what he needed. And maybe my insistence on, I was, he was raised in more of a nuanced household, and I was like, in fact, this is an example of how really awful I was and maybe how hard to be married to. After we'd gone through the temple, garments were, I wanted them, we're going to wear them all the time pretty much. One time I saw him leaving and I noticed he didn't have his garments on. He was going to go meet up with one of his buddies. And I went, you're not wearing your garments? And he goes, I don't want to put them on. And I go, you're not leaving this house without him. And he goes, watch me. And, he left. I had hair down to my waist. This memory is just coming up for me. It's like I had this long, beautiful hair. I was so mad at it, and he loved my hair. He loved my hair. While he was gone, I flipped my head over, put all my hair up like this, put it in a rubber band, and I chopped it off. I cut, and then I put it in a clear plastic bag and hung it on our door and said, with a little sign that said, never leave without your garments again.
Wow, that's intense.
But it's actually turned out kind of cute. It's kind of this fluffy hair then. But that's how I thought. How can I impress upon him how important this is to me that we keep these covenants, And oh my gosh, that was probably the wackiest thing I ever did. But I did.
What does it do to your self-worth and your sense of vulnerability?
Oh, it's so hard to trust. It's just so hard to trust. You know, every time he was late from work or I spent so much time crying but I did pour myself into my kids. And I also gained so much weight. I think emotional eating, I gained like 80 pounds. I was probably 80 pounds heavier than I am now. Which of course made it even worse, because then he found me, because I was sort of like, you're going to do this to me, then I'm going to do this to you, But then I was less and less attractive. It's just this, it's terrible. Infidelity is awful. If one of you wants to be, I realize there's all sorts of things that work now for people, but I'm still big on monogamy and fidelity. It's a big thing for me.
And so you feel ugly, you feel worthless.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And you self-sabotage so much, and you blame yourself, and then you go through these roller coaster, like I'm gonna be great. I'm gonna lose weight and I'm gonna have the house clean when he gets home, and then you just get angry and go, I don't care. So there's just so much of this that goes on. But I think the other thing that happens, and we'll get into this maybe a little bit later, is that betrayal from my first marriage has been a real anchor for me with the anger I felt when I felt like the church had betrayed me. I went right back to all those emotions again. It just took me right back to that. And I think that's why my girlfriend and I have had this talk a few times, why she can stay so sort of New Order Mormon or whatever, and just kind of cafeteria or whatever you want to call it. But I'm just going, I was betrayed, and that makes me so angry. I think it's an anchor back to feelings of betrayal in my marriage.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm being you're the psychologist.
No.
You maybe tell me, but I'm thinking there's a tie in there.
Well, you're the expert in your life, so you'd know. And what's it like to be active in the church when your husband's been excommunicated, your family's been shamed? What does that do to your activity and to how you feel about the plan of salvation and your ward members, knowing that your husband bears the scarlet letter?
Yeah.
And you're trying to advance or serve in the church. Was that complicated or not?
Our ward, actually, I had some conflicting emotions about that, because people really rallied around him primarily. That was back in the days when they announced it. Like, it was announced, I think, at priesthood meeting, he'd been excommunicated and things. And I almost felt like at one point I started wondering if he was doing this to get attention, because people would just rally around and they're determined to get him back and fellowship him. And that's the way of the church, isn't it? To love the sinner and bring them back. And so I never felt really ostracized. I did think people kind of felt sorry for me a little, but I honestly felt like he kind of reveled in the attention of, let's get him back, and all of that. So not too much. It was embarrassing to some extent, but like, we were all on the path to try to get him back.
Okay. And you served in lots of church callings throughout that time?
Yes. I had, right before that, I'd been the Young Women's president. I remember talking to the bishop saying, maybe I should be released from this. This is kind of hard, So I was released from that calling, but I served in lots of callings. Mostly I taught Relief Society, and I loved teaching, and I love Mormons. I really do. I think Mormons are such good people, and I had a lot of support from the people in my wards over the years.
So, how did things end in that first marriage?
Well, it ended. It ended. I was 38 years old, 5 children. He had another affair with his secretary this time, and she was, quite a bit younger than me, and it was the end. My little girls with CF my youngest was very sick by this time, and requiring, with CF you do CPT, chest physiotherapy, hours every day on both girls, and so my life was really full, and I just couldn't believe it. It was New Year's Eve. my husband and I had watched the ball drop, and then we'd gone up to bed, and I was laying in bed, and the phone rings, and it's his secretary, and she said, "Is your husband there?" And I said, "He's right here. We're in bed." And she said, "I need to talk to him." And he said, "Is that?" And I went, "Yes." I looked at him. I was actually clueless again, because we were actually doing really well at this point. Financially, we were doing well. The girls were sick, but I thought our relationship was, in fact, he'd just bought me this big diamond. He'd just taken me to Europe. I realize now a lot of that was like guilt, but I thought we were doing well. He went over to the other side of the bed, got on the phone, and he started saying, "It's okay, baby. You told him? You told him? It's okay. It's okay." And I'm laying there going, "Are you kidding me?" And I realized, here we go again. And that was the beginning of the end of our marriage. So he eventually, I can't remember who served who, but we ended up getting a divorce.
So how in the world do you contemplate divorce without a college education, without a career, with 5 children and 2 with special needs, and now you're contemplating being on your own? What's that like?
It's so scary. I felt like I've got to find a man. I got to find someone to take care of me, because I had a high school education. I mean, I really, really was scared. But
you decided to kick him out, and I'm done with you.
Yeah, well, he left, and he eventually, they had a baby, and he was gone, and then he left his job. And so financially, I thought at the time, because we were doing quite well, I thought, well, at least he'll support me. But that all went away, and so we lost our home. We lost everything.
You were living where?
We were living at that time. We were living in North County, San Diego.
Okay.
So we sold our home in lieu of foreclosure. We didn't get anything out of it, and financially, we went from doing quite well to just literally nothing within a few months. And a friend of mine actually gave me a job as a part-time secretary.
Where'd you live?
I moved into a little tiny little home.
With 5 kids?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I don't know. I can't even remember, honestly. And I didn't get help from the, we did have some savings, but that got eaten up really quick.
Were you renting this little home?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Renting with 5 kids,
Yeah.
Single mom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not seeing him, very, very little. He really just kind of disappeared. So it was very tough. And so it's kind of a weird story. I told you it's kind of weird. I don't even know if I want to go there, but maybe I will in a few minutes. But anyway, I kind of got into I dated this one guy for a while and totally fell in love with him. Absolutely fell in love with him. But he wasn't Mormon, and he wasn't interested in getting married, and so we broke that off. And then I got into the Mormon single dating scene, which is not a fun place to be, but this guy asked me out, and he said, "I'm going to marry you on our first date." And he was supposedly this financial advisor.
Here we go again.
And I jumped right into that. We actually eloped to the temple. And I was sealed to him, and I thought, okay, this is my shot.
How long had you known him?
Oh, not a few months, maybe. Yeah, it was one of those really, really dumb. And within a few months, I realized this is a disaster.
But it wasn't a temple marriage. You said he eloped to the temple.
We did. We did.
So you had to have your sealing canceled first?
Yes. Man, this is so long ago, John. I forget I did have to have my sealing canceled.
Was that easy? Was that hard?
No, that was very, very difficult.
What was that like?
Very hard. They wouldn't let me cancel it until I did get married again. So there was this because I wanted it canceled immediately. So remember, I dated this one guy that I didn't marry for a year. So I was still sealed to my first husband. They would not let me cancel it. And then he was not going to marry me. We dated almost a year. And then right after him, I met this other guy, and then by then, it had been a year, and finally, in fact, the cancellation came in right before we were sealed, and we literally eloped to the temple. And
what were your thoughts about that sealing cancellation process?
I was so angry that I couldn't he had a baby. They were married. They were, and my husband and his new wife had gotten married. They had a baby. And
he cheated on you multiple times.
Oh, many times.
You should be able to just say no more.
Yes. I just wanted, but what I was told, this is how it was explained to me, that the sealing itself carried all these blessings that I didn't want to divest myself of until I was sealed to another man who could take me to the celestial kingdom, because I need that, and I'm like,
you need a man to take you there.
Yeah, of course you do, of course you do. So that was a difficult process, but even worse on the second one. But anyway, so I jumped, rebounded. And it wasn't good. And I actually really like this guy. We're still in touch with each other. We both realized we just were not a good match. He's a good man. I was a good woman. He had 5 children. I had 5 children. Hello. What were we thinking? It was not good. And I think I know he's happily married now, and I'm so happy for him. I was not the woman for him, and vice versa. But now we were now sealed in the temple, and I'm not going to divorce again, because and he was faithful to me and everything. We just were both extremely unhappy, and of course a lot going on. And my daughter passed away, and during this time, and my youngest daughter, she had a double lung transplant and rejected her lungs, and I was way more of a mom than I was a wife. I realized my part in all of this. This story, when I talk about it, I can't even believe I'm talking about me, but it was crazy. It was just crazy. But here was my thought.
And you had tried to have your daughter be healed, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, she had so many blessings, and she had this one blessing.
Why did you have blessings?
Because I believed in the power of the priesthood. I believed it was God's, working on earth, and she was so incredible. She'd fought so hard for her life, and
did she know she had a terminal illness?
Oh yeah. So she was 14 when she passed away, and she fought. So she had this double lung transplant.
What was her name?
Alexis, but Lexi is what we called her. And she was just this bright, beautiful light, so spunky. So anyway. She had numerous blessings, but she finally had a double lung transplant in San Diego. And I remember these 3 men that I adored so much, my bishopric. They came, and after her transplant, the transplant went beautifully, and then within a few days she started rejecting her lungs, and she was put in a medically induced coma. For 3 months she was in this medically induced coma. And we didn't know if she would come. I just didn't know from day to day whether she would live. And they came, and numerous blessings, but they gave her this powerful blessing that I was there for. And they blessed her that she would be healed, that she would live a long, productive life and everything. And I was just like, thank you. It was like a done deal for me. Really, I had that much faith in the power of the priesthood. I knew she was going to be fine. Well, these 3 months left her paralyzed from the waist down. So her lungs started working again, and eventually she walked with a walker and cane and braces, but anyway, 18 months later, she did finally reject her lungs completely, and she passed away at 14. So, and that 18 months was so hard, just so hard, and I was so confused because she'd had these blessings, and I knew that she was going to be okay. And
did she think she was going to be okay?
Oh yeah, she did.
Do you remember talking to her about her getting worse, but having had the blessing? What was that like for her?
We had lots of conversations. She wore this shirt that said, "I believe in miracles." Right towards the very end, I said, "You are the miracle. I believe in miracles too, and you are the miracle." And the night before she passed away, because we kept thinking, but she was dying, and you could see she couldn't breathe, and I was holding her, and she could hardly talk, but we had this 3 squeezes that meant "I love you," and I was sleeping with her by then, so I could carry her into the bathroom and stuff, and she squeezed my hand 3 times. I said, "Honey, what?" And she said, "Thank you. I said, for what? She said, for everything. And she said, I'm not giving up, but I have to let go. She died the next morning, but she just, I'm sorry. Wow. That was in 95. I will share something that strengthened my faith, because I was very confused about the fact that this blessing didn't come to pass the way I thought it should. But I was holding her as she died. I was holding her in my arms, and this is something I'm still confused about, John, because did I imagine this? But as I held her, I knew the moment that her spirit left her body. I felt her, because she got, I'd been holding her for an hour, and she was down to about 50 pounds, but still, I was on the bed, and she was heavy, and all of a sudden I just felt this lightness, like her spirit, and then I realized she looked up at me, and then I went, she's gone, and I literally, my arms lifted up. So there, I believe that the spirit leaves the body. I mean, I'm so confused. I say I don't know anymore, but at the time I thought, and her eyes opened really big just before she passed away, but I know there's not too many parents that hold their children as they pass away. It's really it's the most difficult thing you can imagine, but it's also this beautiful thing in a way, Anyway, I love my Lexi so much.
Thank you for sharing that. Sending loving thoughts to Lexi. You had mentioned in your outline having some brothers and maybe even another child kind of leave the church at some point. I just thought we'd kind of
let's lighten
just kind of cover those sorts of things, and we'll begin the very next episode with kind of what rock bottom was like and then how you emerged from it.
Okay.
So let's...
Yes, I did. The oldest of 10 children. I had two of my brothers, actually. I didn't know if they left the church, or I don't know if they've resigned, but they went inactive, and I could not figure that out, because here we were, this is the truth, and I, of course, hook, line, and sinker bought into the whole. The only reason you'd ever leave the church is if you wanted to sin, or you were just lazy, or those sorts of things. And I loved these brothers so much, but. Sometimes I think, why haven't people asked me about why? But I didn't ask them. It's like we just don't go there. But I can, one brother had been in a bishopric, but he went through a divorce and things, so I just thought, there's got to be. But then my other brother and his wife left together. Now, all 7 of my brothers, I was 7 brothers and 2 sisters, all of them served missions. We were all married in the temple. I think I was the only one that was sealed later, but, we were just ticking off the boxes, But this brother and his wife left, and I thought, that is so weird. And then I saw that their lives seemed so happy and full, and so there was some confusion there. Now, my oldest son, when he was getting ready to go on a mission, he announced that he wasn't going to go on a mission, and he quit going to church. But this is all when my husband and I were getting a divorce. And I just felt like that had just, our lives were so chaotic. And my oldest son eventually did just, he married outside the church. He married this incredible girl who escaped from Iran, come over here when she was 8 years old. And I just love her, and they've got 3 children. But I always had this heartache, and I talked to my bishop about my son, and I said, he's my oldest son, he's my boy, and he said, you've just got to bear your testimony to him every time you have the opportunity. So I've spent the last 20 years or 30 years, whatever, he's 45 now. I mean, I was just constantly bearing bless his heart, he would just smile at me and look at me and nod and say, I love you, and just so... I can't imagine and then, I would go to the temple at least once a month, and then sometimes, always putting his name on the temple roll, he and his wife, and just certain that, I was going to personally save them. Turns out he really kind of saved me. So those were because then as I watched him and his family, and he's a a long distance runner. He runs all over the world, and I've taken him in as my business partner too. My two sons are my business partners, but he and his children are so moral and good and beautiful and
We'll get there.
loving.
We'll get there.
I'm like going, how is this happening?
That must have been confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this ends part one of my interview with Collette Larsen. We've taken it to the point where she's had her second marriage fail, and a daughter pass away, and some people close to her leave the church. And we'll see what it's like to hit financial rock bottom. And how does a woman in her mid to late 30s with
40s, yeah, by then, yeah.
40s with 4 children still remaining, how do you pick up and end up building a multi-million-dollar business and find your own power and find a way to thrive after so much adversity? So thank you for joining us for part one, and come right back. Don't go away. Come right back for part two, because there's more to this cool story. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Collette.
Thank you.